Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today we are going to be talking about freshwater shrimp, Neocaridina species. It's hard to believe in our fish we do have a tank set aside to breed red cherry shrimp, and it's actually not that hard. It's easy to care for them, they're easy to breed, and so we're going to show you how to do that. Now if you want more information, we're really excited. We've entered into a partnership with Flip Aquatics. Definitely, if you want more information about shrimp, check out his YouTube channel, Flip Aquatics, and also his business, flipaquatics.com. If you're looking for high quality shrimp and everything you need to care for shrimp, that is the place to go. And so we're looking forward to this year, that partnership and what that brings for us. So stay tuned. So how did this tank come to be? Luke and Eli, my two boys, when they were about 13 and 10, they decided they wanted to start breeding shrimp. So I had them go around the fish room. They found about 10 or 12 of the best cherry shrimp that they could find, and they threw them in this 20 long. At the time, the only thing that was in here were a couple of long fin bristlenose plecos. And so they decided to make this their red cherry shrimp breeding tank, and that's what we have here today. These things are super awesome. So they are Neocaridina species. They are native to Southeast Asia, where they can be found in streams and ponds. Now what's really cool, if you look at here, we've got lots and lots of these things. Like I said, we started out with about 10 or so, and now we've got many hundreds, and we've sold lots of shrimp out of this tank over the last, I would say, 6 months or so. And they're super easy to keep, they're super easy to breed, so let's get into it. Let's talk about how we do it. So first thing, when it comes to Neocaridina species, the females are actually going to be a little bit larger and have a little bit more color than the males will. So we have to be really careful here. Yes, the boys need to probably do some culling and remove some of the less colored shrimp out to other tanks where we're not focused on breeding. However, we have to also be careful because the males will show less color. They will also be smaller. And so one of the mistakes we want to avoid making that is common for people who first keep shrimp is they tend to remove all the less colored shrimp and the smaller ones, and they wind up removing all of their males. So we have to be really careful there. And I think one of the reasons why people get into shrimp is they're really peaceful. They don't bother anybody. They don't really pick on one another. But that also presents some challenges when we're looking for tank mates. I often tell people when they ask, the best shrimp tank, in my opinion, is a shrimp-only tank. You greatly reduce the risk of predation when you have just shrimp. But if you feel you want to keep your shrimp with other types of aquatic inhabitants, especially fish, we've actually had really good luck keeping them with bristlenose plecos. And in fact, in some cases, we've had tanks that kick out both bristlenose fry and shrimplets, and it's worked out fairly well. So we've got bristlenose in this tank, haven't had any issues, at least not any noticeable predation. The big thing is these shrimp stay really small. So again, the females might be about an inch or so. The males are going to be smaller. The shrimplets are absolutely tiny there. In fact, when they are first on their own, they are almost impossible to see in some cases. So what that means is when it comes to tank mates, if you're interested in breeding shrimp, don't put fish in the tank. Again, we've had luck obviously with bristlenose plecos, but that's about all I would recommend unless you've got a lot of hiding places for them, because they are absolutely tiny. So any fish that has a mouth big enough to fit a shrimp in its mouth is probably not going to be suitable. So what is? Like I said, the bristlenose, maybe something like pygmy cory cats or some guppies. Now here again, we're talking about full-size shrimp, not trying to breed. But yeah, pygmy cats or guppies, really tiny rasboras, or maybe some tetras that are, very small. Those might be options for you, but anything on the larger side, and you're probably going to start losing shrimp unless you've got a lot of hiding places. And if you've got a lot of hiding places, well, you might not see them very often. Let's talk water parameters. So for us, our temperatures in our fish room are somewhere between 78 and 80, and that's pretty warm for the Neocaridina. Most of the time, they're going to do pretty well in the upper 60s, low 70s. One of the things that's kind of interesting about these shrimp is if you don't have a heater in your tank at normal room temperature, right around 73 degrees or so, they're going to do pretty well. Again, for us, we keep them in warmer temperatures, and that's not necessarily ideal, and it could be one of the reasons why we actually have so much reproduction, because what happens, the warmer you go with your water temperatures, the more they're going to reproduce, the faster they're going to grow, but the faster they're going to die. And so if you keep them in the upper 60s to low 70s, you're probably going to have your shrimp around a lot longer. They may not breed as quickly or grow as fast, but the life cycle does slow down. So recommended, again, upper 60s, maybe up to mid 70s. When we start getting in that 80 range, they're gonna really move in terms of their life cycle. pH, they're going to do pretty good right around neutral, at least the Neocaridina do. Now for us, our pH is pretty close to an 8. Obviously, they're handling that just fine. But again, if we're looking for optimal, somewhere around neutral, 7.2, 7.4. As we get closer to 8, yes, they can deal with that. But again, we're getting closer to that upper limit. Water hardness, general hardness, somewhere between 7 to 15. Carbonate hardness, anywhere from 2 to 8. And our water parameters are pretty close to that. One of the things that's kind of interesting about shrimp, and it's a little different than when you're keeping fish, and that is water changes. A lot of people have more success when they do fewer water changes and smaller volumes. And so on this tank, we generally do about a 10% water change per week, and that's enough to keep the ammonia at 0, the nitrites at 0, and the nitrates within that 20 parts per million range. Obviously, we're going to talk about this in a moment, but we have a lot of floating plants that can suck up a lot of nitrates. Shrimp, just in general, as individuals, don't produce a ton of waste. Obviously, when you have as many as we do in this 20-gallon long, waste can build up. But again, we're managing that well with the 10% water changes that we're doing here, along with the plants that we have that are dealing with the nitrogen issues. Now, when it comes to feeding, shrimp are super easy to feed. One thing we have to consider is that you see them all, they're busy, they're picking through the substrate, they're all over the floating plants and all over everything else. And what they're doing is they're picking off the algae and the microorganisms that are on those surfaces. And so a well-established tank is very necessary. You have to have a tank that has been around a while, that's got a buildup of microorganisms, that has a buildup of detritus, that has a buildup of algae preferentially. Now, you can feed them food, and in fact, we feed them lots of different types of food. We put Repashy in this tank, all kinds of Repashy, from the Morningwood Repashy that has a high fiber content to the Community Plus that's really for the plecos. But once we put that in there, the shrimp go crazy for it, and there's just a big mound of shrimp all over those blocks of Repashy. We use sinking pellets, again, mostly for the plecos, but the shrimp love them. And there is specialized shrimp food that may be more necessary if your water is on the softer side. And so because our water is on the harder side, they get a lot of the minerals that they need. And of course, the foods that we feed have minerals as well, but there are specialized shrimp foods in addition to just regular food. So one of the topics that's hotly debated in the freshwater shrimp community is, what size tank do you need? And you research the internet, and the tank sizes are all over the place, from 1 gallon to 20 gallons or more. Shrimp are small. And because they're small, they don't need a lot of water volume. But we have to keep a couple things in mind. One, they do reproduce. You get males and females, and yes, you too can have a tank full of shrimp. And so you have to be very careful, because as you get more shrimp, you get more bioload. When it comes to small tanks, we also have to deal with the fact that it's harder to control water parameters and their consistency. Shrimp can be very sensitive to changes in temperature. They cannot deal with ammonia, especially nitrites. Invertebrates in general are very sensitive to nitrites, and so if you get an ammonia spike, you get a nitrite spike, you could lose all of your shrimp pretty quickly. And that's going to be a little bit easier to have happen in a smaller tank. So while yes, you could put a small number of shrimp in a very small tank, I recommend, especially for a beginner, the larger you go, the more potential for success you will have. So for me, even for me, I probably don't go much under a 5-gallon or a 10-gallon. You see here 20 longs. In fact, all of the breeding that we've ever done with shrimp has been done in 20-gallon tanks. I like the volume. You can see here we get a lot of shrimp. They're all over the place. They're all over the substrate, the plants. They're even connected to the duckweed at the top of the tank, which is pretty cool. Now, when it comes to decorating your tank, here again, it's about surface area, because that surface area is going to house things like algae and the detritus in the substrate and the microorganisms. And so a lot of shrimp really enjoy wood, plants, especially floating plants. And so I found things, what we're looking at here in this tank, we've got a lot of guppy grass. There's some hornwort in here as well. At one point, we were growing out some jungle bell that was just kind of floating at the top of the tank. They enjoy that a lot. I haven't really seen too much of a preference in terms of substrate. I've had them on sand. They do fine. Here you're looking at gravel. Obviously, they're doing fine here as well. So I wouldn't stress out too much about the substrate. I will say, if you've got substrate that's got really large pebbles and you're getting a lot of stuff that sinks between those pebbles, that might be harder to regulate the waste that's being produced. So standard gravel, standard sand has been fine for the Neocaridina. Now again, what's really super important here when it comes to keeping shrimp is having surface area floating plants. And so I highly recommend, if you're going to do a planted tank, use scuppy grass, use hornwort. You can use regular, anubias and things like that as well, but we're getting the best luck with our floating plants. Okay, so when it comes to breeding, essentially you get a small group of shrimp, maybe 6, 8, 10 or so, and you just let them be. And it really is that simple. You put them in there. If you've got a well-established tank, they will make babies. Again, the females are larger than the males, and what happens is the females will hold those eggs kind of under their bodies, and they will fan those eggs, and then eventually the shrimplets hatch. When it comes to the shrimplets, one of the issues is they are absolutely tiny, to the point when they are first released, it's extremely hard to even see them. And so you have to be careful when it comes to things like tank maintenance. That's also a time where you really have to have an established tank, because those shrimplets are going to feed on the detritus and the little tiny particles of food that are being chopped up by either other fish or the larger shrimp, algae. And so you really want to make sure you have an established tank. Now, when it comes to filtration, I highly recommend sponge filters. If you're not going to use a sponge filter, make sure you have an intake sponge on any hang-on-the-back filter or canister filter, because your shrimplets will get sucked up, and even smaller shrimp will also get sucked in through the intakes of hang-on-the-back filters and canister filters for sure. So if you're at all interested in breeding, make sure you can protect the fry from getting sucked into the filter. So if you haven't tried shrimp before, I highly recommend give them a try. Lots of different color varieties. They're peaceful. They're scavengers. They're really cool. And if you enjoyed this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.